Welcome back, I'm EG, and this is episode 5 of the Conlang 101 series. Today we're going to be talking about semantics and pragmatics. So now that you've sort of put your sentences together, your words together, your language together, you could very easily just go and use what you've got in your own language, in your own story. You don't technically need anything else to be able to use a conlang in a story because you have your words and your sentence and you can then put it in as you need. Generally speaking, you don't really have to worry about the semantics and pragmatics of a language that you've invented and are putting into a story because you are more than likely going to be using a similar semantic and pragmatic system to the natural language in which you are writing. Much of it's going to be very similar in that direction. However, if you want to explore a bit more and expand a bit more, then semantics and pragmatics is a great tool. Actually, semantics and pragmatics can make your conlang a much larger part of the story and can expand your characterization of the people, the speakers, and just add an extra element of je ne sais quoi. I'm bundling semantics and pragmatics together because they are very much related. Semantics is the study of meaning coming from relationships between words and within sentences. Pragmatics is the study of meaning within context, so it relies very much upon interpretation. For conlangs, especially in stories, in books, pragmatics is perhaps the more useful aspect, but semantics can play a role. So let's start with semantics. Semanticians, just like syntacticians, like to use diagrams for mapping the relationship between words, the reference, all of that stuff. And again, I don't do that because I find it rather tedious. It's a very complicated science and there's a whole lot of interpretation that goes into it. So I'm not going to do that. I'm also not going to go into a huge amount of detail into semantics simply because it is an enormously technical field, even though meaning is highly subjective. So I'm going to paint a very broad picture of semantics and what you can do with it. And if you want to know more, I suggest looking at some of the resource lists down below. There are a lot of different things that you can look at for semantics. It's a very broad subject and it can be very technical at times, but there's also some really interesting non-technical pieces that you don't need any linguistic background to know. For conlangs specifically, a lot of the relationships and the meaning is going to be shown in your translation and your syntax. So again, there's another reason why you don't necessarily need to worry too much about it unless you are creating a fully fledged language or you intend on discussing some of the finer technical pieces of that language. There are a couple of things that you might pay attention to in semantics, such as reference. If in English, the sentence, "That girl's name is capricious," that girl, specifically girl, refers to the entity capricious. That girl specifies that it is this entity that we are talking about. A girl could specify any number of different girls. And so it's just reference, refer to something else. You can also find meaning in a word through a number of binary oppositions, and this is the one you see talked about the most, specifically in other sciences that are related to linguistics like anthropology and sociology. The most popular word that linguists look at when talking about binary oppositions is the word bachelor. Bachelor contains positive and negative aspects that are referring to other words. For example, bachelor is plus male and minus female. Bachelor is plus unmarried minus married, plus adult minus child, that sort of a thing. So a lot of words in every language can have those plus and minus aspects, those binary oppositions, and the word then exists as a composition of those oppositions. However, you can also have words that exist on a spectrum. For example, hot and cold exist on a spectrum, with cool and warm being in between. You can say that hot is a minus cold binary opposition, but it really exists on a spectrum. So depending on the word, you have a bunch of different meanings behind it, and these meanings can be fairly significant when you are talking about a language. So many of the distinctions that you are going to see in your conlang are based on your lexicon and what things you want to include in your language and what things you haven't included in your language. You can say plus or minus gender if you have a gender specific idea in your language. If not, then that may not exist. For example, if your conlang doesn't refer to cold because the speakers all live in an extremely warm environment, and you place a speaker in an environment that has cold, they will not be able to say it is cold. They will say something like it is not hot. They just don't have that referent. It doesn't exist. And that can be interesting when you are talking about the sort of culture and the people that speak the language. Many of the technical details that you would find in semantics can be ignored as long as you have an idea of the underlying meaning of a word and what you want your language to convey. Now, pragmatics is a rather more significant aspect in devising your conlang. Pragmatics is dependent on context, on situation, and the interpretation that is placed within that situation by speakers, either native speakers or non-native speakers. Then it can be rather dramatic depending on what sort of problem you've created for your characters. So one of the primary aspects that you will see people talking about when dealing with pragmatics is the concept of implicature. Within implicature, one of the major elements is the concept of conversational maxims. These are 4 maxims outlined by Grice many years ago. I don't remember the exact date of his original publication. I'll link it in the description box below, or I'll link a reference. I don't have the original. Sorry. 4 maxims are quality, which is the assumption that you're telling the truth. Quantity, which is you're saying the necessary information without providing excessive detail. Then relevance, which is the assumption that you are remaining on topic, that what you're saying is relevant to the conversation. And manner, which is to say you are clear, you are concise, and you are orderly. Everything is in order, it has a purpose, in the order that you've stated it. You can make the assumption that a speaker is following these 4 maxims, and most of the time people do. Then you can interpret situations correctly. A vague statement like "it's raining" could then be interpreted as something like "I need an umbrella," that sort of a thing, because it's relevant, it's orderly, and you expect the person to be telling the truth. However, if you assume that the speaker is not following these maxims, or if a speaker outright flouts these maxims and the other person doesn't know it, then you can create a whole bunch of interesting situations that cause lovely problems for you to solve. It's great fun. Absolutely adore flouting maxims and causing trouble in my stories. Anyways, besides the point, moving on. There are also in pragmatics such things as speech acts, and these are things that you are trying to accomplish with your speech. So you have to ask, what is the utterance accomplishing? Is it asking for a response? Is it an order or an offer? The purpose of the act may affect the meaning and interpretation. So some possible speech acts you have are a greeting and a greeting response, a question and answer response, an offer with acceptance or refusal, an apology, a request, an order, a naming situation, an objection, that sort of a thing. You have to determine what speech act you're using and what the interpretation can be thereof. "It's raining outside" could be interpreted as a question of "will you get me an umbrella?" if the speech act is appropriately delineated. Also within your pragmatic situation, please consider such things as cultural differences. Not every language and culture within that language sees the world in the same way and acts out the world in the same way. They are very much different. For example, a greeting asking about someone's family, "Hi, how are you? How is your family?" could be considered extremely insulting in a society where work is placed above everything else, and if you don't ask about someone's work, then you are being quite rude. There are a huge number of things that go into the meaning and interpretation of a language. If you need an example, just ask yourself how often you actually say precisely what it is that you mean and how often you take things literally. I bet the answer is going to surprise you a bit because language is incredibly complicated. So language is a symbol of our culture and our thoughts. It is not an exact representation of things. It is very difficult to pin down. For conlangs, as long as you are intentional in a character profile or a cultural profile or your speaker's profile, then you can figure out the meaning of their words. The pragmatics and the semantics should fall into place. If not, then perhaps you need to think, why isn't it falling into place? Is this an interesting cultural or personal aspect? It could be a personality trait. It's an interesting linguistic uniqueness, and it's great fun. Meanings are often determined in context. So what is your story trying to say? For me, in Aloiac, I don't talk much about the semantics and the pragmatics of the original language because it is all about how the dissidents in my society use the language to further their cause that matters. And I shall give you no more because there are many spoilers to do with the language. It's rather significant spoilers. So I encourage you, if you are interested in finding out more about how to use Conlang in a book, please go check out Speaker of Words. If you have any questions, do let me know. I am more than happy to help. I will leave resource links in the description box below. You can find me on all of the internet places, the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the Twitters. Go check out my website. I'm happy to talk. I'm a little bit nerdy about language, so if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, next week we're going to be talking about all of the little detail pieces that I haven't talked about yet, like how to create an alphabet. Oh, it's going to be great. So I shall see you next time. Have a fantastic day. Bye.